All right, hello everyone. Welcome to my channel. I'm Thomas. I do educational videos. Today, uh, we are doing the 73rd video on the reciprocal system of theory, which is a theory of everything derived by Dewey B. Larson back in the 20th century, up until his death in 1990. We are actually looking at his posthumous book that came out in 1995 called Beyond Space and Time. That his attempt to move into metaphysics, religion, philosophy, psychology, whereas his all of his earlier work was on more of the harder sciences, astronomy, physics, and chemistry, with a couple of books on economics thrown in there. But it all just demonstrates how Larson's uh, is a system of theory, or a theory of everything. It is basically, it's a way to think about any subject. And if you can kind of master the system or become fluent in the system, then you can apply it to any subject you want. And I think that's the most important thing about the theory, is that it levels the playing field. You do not any longer have to rely on a pointy-headed, ivory tower, uh, white lab coat wearing expert to tell you what you should think about this or that. You have the tools yourself. If you can become fluent in the reciprocal system, you have the tools yourself to understand these things and to make determinations about these things. It's a difficult system to understand. There's no doubt about that. You're not going to figure it out from watching one video from me. But if you put the same kind of effort into learning the reciprocal system as you did in your high school chemistry class, or any one of your high school classes, basically you put in an hour a day for half a year or whatever, you will begin to start understanding the reciprocal system, and it will pay back big dividends. Okay, now the general idea of the system is that unlike the Greeks, Larson really decided that, or derived or induced and deduced, that the universe is not made out of atoms. It's not made out of matter, and the universe is not made out of energy, unlike what Einstein might tell you. But the universe is actually made out of motion. We can look at E equals mc squared. Energy equals matter times the speed of light squared. The fact that energy and matter can be converted one to the other in and of itself is enough to show that neither one of them can be the most fundamental thing in the universe, because there has to be something that underlies both of them, and that is motion. That's what Larson says. The universe is made out of motion. And motion is the relationship between space and time. In fact, in his earliest books, Larson actually referred to motion as space-time. But then he decided to change it to motion. He also, in his later works, he actually just called it change in 3 dimensions. And that's the next part of his theory. His first postulate is that the universe is made out of motion. Motion is the relationship between space and time. Space and time are 3-dimensional. They're both the same. He calls them reciprocals of each other. And so whatever quality space has, time also has that quality. And whatever quality time has, space also has that quality. So what we know about space is that it's 3-dimensional, or I say 3 or 4-dimensional. But either way, it's multi-dimensional using XYZ coordinates, we'll say. And Therefore, time also is three-dimensional. And he calls that coordinate time, just like coordinate space. And then what we know about time, what we see clearly about time, or not, we don't see it, but we sense that time is always progressing. It's flowing. It's always getting later and later and later. And in the same way, space is flowing. It's always getting further and further and further apart. And this has been observed by the Hubble telescope. That's showing that all of the distant galaxies are moving away from each other. Now that's what you call a scalar motion, and the flow of time is also a scalar motion, a motion that has no particular direction, but it has a magnitude. And again, you can understand, you can visualize scalar motion by taking a balloon and putting a bunch of dots on it with a magic marker and then blowing up the balloon. All of the dots are moving away from each other, but in a scalar manner, in no particular direction. The further away they are, the faster they're moving away from each other. Now that's really just a kind of a two-dimensional analogy of a three-dimensional thing. A three-dimensional analogy of that would be more like taking a loaf of raisin bread or something and then putting it in the oven, and as it expands, all of the raisins are moving away from each other. Because if you do the balloon analogy, you're just talking about the surface of the balloon. But with the raisin bread analogy, the raisins, even in the interior of the balloon, are also moving away from each other. So anyway, so that's where he started from, and he then basically the next part is that space and time are both in discrete units. There's a minimum unit of space and a minimum unit of time, and 1 unit of space in 1 unit of time is the speed of light. The speed of light, where Einstein says it's the maximum speed of the universe, Larson says that the speed of light is the midpoint of the universe. It's the neutral point. And there's an entire half of the universe that's actually moving faster than the speed of light, which he calls the cosmic sector, or sector 2. The material sector, or sector 1, is the part we're familiar with that is moving slower than the speed of light. And that part of the universe progresses based on aggregation. So the particles just kind of glom onto each other. And up until it gets to its most complex level, using the laws of chemistry and bonding and so on, and until it gets to DNA, which is the most complex level. And a DNA molecule has billions of atoms in it. And at that point, it becomes eligible to fall under the control of a sector 2 unit. And the sector 2 unit then, when combined with the sector 1 unit, becomes what Larson calls a life unit. Now remember, sector 2 is slower, sector 1 is slower than the speed of light, sector 2 is faster than the speed of light. Over here we have space-time relationships, 3-dimensional space, progressing time. Over here we have time-space relationships. We have 3-dimensional time, coordinate time, and progressing space, which Larson calls clock space. Just like over here we have clock time. So here we have coordinate space and clock time. Over here we have coordinate time and clock space. When they combine, they turn into a life unit. And then when the life unit evolves to its most complex level, it becomes eligible to be controlled overall by what he calls a sector 3 unit. And the sector 3 is the unit that is entirely beyond space and time. I would submit that that is really what the realm of light is, because at the speed of light, all of the Lorentz relativistic equations fade away and time doesn't exist anymore. Um, and so, but Larson doesn't say that, but he doesn't really say what Sector 3 is. But basically, Sector 3 for Larson is just his word for God or the spiritual world. And when a human becomes the ethical human, that's life unit's most complex level. When it gets to its most complex level, then it can be taken control of by a Sector 3 component. And Sector 3 is geared toward ethical behavior, whereas the Sector 2 control unit is geared toward survival. And so there are certain situations where those two are working at cross purposes, where your ethical behavior undercuts your survival behavior. And at that point, the human being has to be able to decide which of those two approaches to take. So that's kind of where we are at here in chapter 18 of this book, Beyond Space and Time, which is the chapter is called Right and Wrong. And he's talking about how intuitive information is our source, or at least our transmission mechanism toward getting communications from Sector 3 that give us, allow us to discern the difference between right and wrong. And he says, we can establish the nature and general characteristics of the portion of this system that constitutes the moral code by means of those items of intuitive information that can be directly verified. And once this basic pattern has been established, we can test other items claimed to have been received through metaphysical channels, that is Sector 3 or beyond space and time, by determining whether they fit into the established pattern. A broad general principle of great significance is the one that we know as the Golden Rule. Most of the great religions express this principle in essentially the same terms, and those that do not state it explicitly give us a number of separate rules and precepts from which a general rule of this kind can be inferred. Here is a rule that meets all of the tests that we have been able to formulate. It is included in all of those religious revelations that we have reason to believe are the most authoritative. All of the different versions are essentially in agreement, and none of the negative items against which we are on guard is applicable. Furthermore, the rule is an admission against interest, as self-interest would not ask for equality of treatment between self and others. It would ask for preferential treatment. The very few objections to the Golden Rule that can be found in philosophical literature are generally of such a frivolous nature that it is questionable whether their authors are actually serious. And he cites Thomas Huxley using a frivolous argument such as that. He describes the moral code is the code of Sector 3 by which the actions of ethical men are governed. If anyone puts himself in the place of the robber, as Huxley suggests, he is not, for the time being, at least an ethical man. He has chosen to follow the code of the animal, and neither his actions nor his desires have any relevance to the moral code or to the status of the Golden Rule as part of that code. Now, I'm not sure that I get this part of the argument, because when he's talking about the Golden Rule, and he's kind of eliminating these other people, he's doing so on the basis that it doesn't have any Sector 3 applications. But I would think that the Golden Rule is something that helps you distinguish between Sector 3 and Sector 2. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And uh, you know, so, Huxley is putting himself in the place of the robber in his example, where Huxley says, he points out, if I put myself in the place of the man who has robbed me, I find that I am possessed by an exceeding desire not to be fined or imprisoned. And so I guess he's uh, arguing against, laws, because he's putting himself in the place of the man who's robbed him. And Larson is saying that there is no Sector 3 um, ethical relevance to this, because he's ineligible for this because he's a robber in the first place. Well, for me, I would just say, I would think that the golden rule, I mean, he's really kind of saying that, and he gets to this later on, is that the golden rule is a piece of intuitive information from Sector 3, and that one demonstration of that is that it's universal, that, he ultimately says that really anything, any kind of simple, ethical, intuitive information that is kind of like universal that's a demonstration of it being correct, because he says that intuitive information can be definitely incorrect, but it's not due to the fact that the information is incorrect. It's due to our ability to translate it correctly, and we're not able, if we don't have a certain amount of kind of practice and preparation, we're not able to actually translate at least more complicated messages from Sector 3. Like simple intuitive information is easy, but I just don't see that, especially in a society that we live in right now. It's kind of like the things that, like, if something is if there's something that everybody believes in, where it's almost unanimous, for me that's almost evidence that it's wrong almost on its face. If everybody believes in something, that almost shows you that it's wrong. But also the golden rule, I just don't see it as having universal application, because again, in our society, I mean, look at a sadomasochist. A sadomasochist wants to be dominated. They want to be brutalized. They want to be whipped, and or whatever. And so they're just like, oh well, I'm going to go whip you because that's what I want. I'm following the golden rule. I'm doing what I want to be done to me. Or, a less maybe crass example would be just somebody with a food addiction, with, I love chocolate cake. And so I'm going to shove it down your throat because I want somebody to shove it down my throat. And you're like, well, I'm on a diet. I don't want to eat any chocolate cake. And they're like, no, that's what I want. So, I think he comes up with a way of kind of sidestepping that, but it doesn't work for me. So he says, the golden rule, consider healthy competition. Okay, Henry Margenau produces an equally absurd application of the rule. Consider healthy competition for worthwhile ends, which most people will regard as ethically desirable. The golden rule does not permit it. For if I want to get ahead of my competitor, I must let him get ahead of me. And he says, no ethical man would take this attitude. Larson says, no ethical man would take this attitude. If he entered into a competition, he would want to win, if possible, but he certainly would not want his competitor to turn the whole activity into a farce by letting him win. Consequently, he is under no obligation to let the competitor win. The golden rule makes no such demand. The mere fact that nothing more to the point can be, okay, so he's saying that this example is absurd, and that's if that's the best you can do, then the golden rule stands. And to me, that's kind of a straw man argument again. And Larson should have noticed that he was using straw man arguments and being kind of protective of his golden rule here, where the only kind of objection he has to these points that are being made are that they are absurd. And he might classify my sadomasochism example as absurd too. But it's real. I mean, and I've had that affect me before, where somebody who really they want to do themselves harm, so they think that they want to do me harm too, because I have a different set of wants and desires. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Well, I would not have them, do unto me what you want to have you do unto you. And so when we have, different preferences like that, the golden rule turns out to be fool's gold to me. But anyway, we didn't cover very much today, but at least I got that objection to Larson's approach here. I don't reject his intuitive approach here, but I do object to the kind of the unanimity aspect of it. Okay, we will get back to this next time, and have a great day. We'll see you soon.